Welcome to the post-event celebration of Crazy Web Game Jam 2024. Our very first jam has been an incredible journey, and it's all thanks to you. This year's theme, Everything is a Remix, inspired the participants to blend genres, mechanics, and ideas from all over. The results were nothing short of spectacular. Out of hundreds of incredible submissions, these outstanding games were chosen for our incubation program. These teams have shown exceptional creativity, innovation, and dedication. The Crazy Web Game Jam brought together over 2,000 developers from across the world, from seasoned veterans to first-time jammers. Every participant showcased the incredible power of creativity. We had 317 games submitted, a community brought together. We want to extend our deepest gratitude to our sponsors and partners, including Indie Hero, Crazy Games, Unity, and Photon for making this jam possible. We also want to thank all the mentors and judges who helped us during the jam. But above all, we want to thank you, the jammers. Without your incredible talent and hard work, this jam would not have been possible. The Crazy Web Game Jam 2024 was just the beginning. Stay tuned for more exciting events in the future. Until then, keep creating, keep innovating, and see you next time.
Hello everyone. So good to be back. And we're back for our third and final masterclass for the incubation of the Crazy Web Game Jam 2024. I'm Rafael Morgan, the VP of Marketing and Partnership at Crazy Games, and I have with me.
Hi everyone, I'm Rovio. I'm the partnership manager at Crazy Games, and we are very excited with the final submissions, which are coming in 8 days, and we are very happy with the quality. And what are we doing today, Rafael?
Well, today we have a very special guest, and we'll be talking about EAP monetization strategies as a crucial element into the game development, right? You can drive serious revenue and sustain long-term success with in-app purchase. We're seeing great results at Crazy Games. Today we got a very special guest, somebody that I know from the industry that I'm very happy to bring on, is Nick Murray. Hope I spoke his name correctly. Nick is a seasonal free-to-play expert with over 15 years of experience, worked with top companies like Rovio, GREE, and Ubisoft, and he has helped countless games to fine-tune their game design, monetization models, and economies, and live operations. I won't talk much about his presentation. I will let him run the show. So the ball is with you, Nick. Thank you for being here today.
Pleasure. All right. So yeah, today we're going to talk about IAP monetization strategy. We have a limited time, so I can't tell you everything that's going to help with your games, but at least I'm hoping to give you some ideas with this presentation where you can maybe avoid some pitfalls, avoid some common mistakes, and build a strategy that is at least good for testing and then iteration and hopefully success later down the road. To give you a bit of background into myself, I'm a free-to-play consultant for the last 6 or 7 years, and I work with lots of different companies. Here are a bunch of examples of companies that I've worked with, like Rovio, Crazy Labs, Calibri, Good Game, etc. I basically started out in the industry working in live operations, then did economy design for Angry Birds 2, amongst other things, and monetization design for that as well. Then was at Ubisoft briefly, was director of live ops and product at GREE, and then I started consulting, basically trying to help game companies to improve the lifetime value of their users. So here is our overall agenda. We'll look at kind of a brief introduction to IAP monetization, why I personally like it, how and when to start thinking about designing it, general economy design, some pricing and selling stuff. And if we have time, we'll get into some advanced strategy, but otherwise, I think the slides will be available to you later. So a brief introduction. I wonder if people recognize this. So this was one of the kind of first and most infamous microtransactions in the Western markets. And it is the Oblivion horse armor. This was, I think, it was a $5 or a $10 purchase that basically brought IAPs and microtransactions to the Western world. For context, there had already been IAPs and free-to-play games driven before that by IAPs, such as Quiz from Nexon as early as 1999. So the business model's been around a long time in Asia, particularly, but Oblivion and the horse armor was really the step-on point for the Western market, I guess. Now, when we think about the economics of IAP-driven free-to-play games, it's quite an interesting thing. So if you look at the image on the right, and thank you to Deconstructor of Fun for this, with free games, we basically look at a starting period of consumer profit. That is to say, the player pays nothing to start playing the game. In fact, they get the majority of the game totally free, and therefore has like high value to them. And then over time, they can incrementally gain more value from the game at an incremental cost. I mean, the reason that I particularly like this model is obviously having no barrier to entry means lots of players can play it. It means that your audience is as big as it can be. It means that you can also test stuff on the market very easily with no barrier. And it means that actually you can test very small products. I mean, like the kind of games that you guys have been working on. Like you can get these out and test them early on and see how your audience reacts to them. Compare that now to, let's say, a more premium model, like which is obviously was the industry standard some years ago, where we actually start with a period of consumer loss. You spend $60 or up to around $80 these days sometimes on a game without really knowing how much you're going to care about it. Like you might have an idea, you might have read reviews, but realistically, you have to overcome this large barrier to actually pay for the game in the first place. At some point in playing that game, it might be a matter of time. So in this graph, the example is 60 hours. It might be a matter of your emotional state. It might be actually, okay, I've reached a point where I feel so happy that I got this game. But at some point, you can move into consumer profit. That is, you feel more value from these kind of games. To give you a clearer example, imagine a Call of Duty game. You spend $60 to buy it. You get at least 60 hours of kind of game out of it. That feels like a reasonable hour per dollar valuation. But then the more you play it, the longer time, the greater value it has to you. And at some point, maybe you've played it for 500 hours. You still haven't paid more than $60. So this is how the premium industry is set up in terms of value to players. There are definite challenges to this, and the premium model there's a reason that premium publishers experiment more with IAP models these days, partly because the massive cost of creating these games. So, for example, Grand Theft Auto 4 cost around $100 million. Grand Theft Auto 5 was about $265 million. Grand Theft Auto 6 is estimated to cost up to around $2 billion. And I have no doubt that it will make it back. It is, after all, probably the biggest IP across games, media, across movies, across everything. And it will generate revenue in no time. But they want to do more than just generate what they've spent on it. So they will also be looking towards more IAPs and on top of the premium base price. Then obviously there are other types of games that are more ad driven. I don't want to talk too much about ads. I'm fairly sure you're all familiar with ad-driven games, predominantly focused on more casual or hyper-casual games, but they rely on a high quantity of users, like very high quantities, because the generation of revenue from ads is quite low on a per-user basis. And then finally, just to round out the kind of different business models here, we've also got subscription. And if you were thinking for your games of going for a more subscription-oriented model, I would generally recommend against it unless you're looking to make a gigantic MMORPG. Those tend to be the only games that can manageably and reliably hold on to subscription revenue. And I'm thinking here about Final Fantasy XIV, World of Warcraft, etc. So anyway, that's a bit of a kind of overview of different business models as to how IAPs kind of confer value relative to other models as well. I just want to take a moment here and explain why IAP is actually my favorite of these different models. There is a misconception in the industry that people who design kind of monetization, IAPs, this kind of thing, are somehow inherently evil or sociopathic. This is a screenshot from Mythic Quest on Apple TV, where the monetization guy is only looking out for like how to make money. In reality, I think it's a far more subtle and interesting job than that. Partly because you have to actually be creative. You have to be adaptable. Like putting in IAPs is not as simple as going, I'm introducing a new weapon. It's going to be the best weapon. I'm going to charge $100 for the weapon. My job is done. It's so much more than that. It's about creatively finding ways to actually include microtransactions and IAPs that respond to player motivations, that fit within the game, that fit within the world of the game. And I think as such, it represents an interesting challenge. Furthermore, the IAP model encourages you to follow KPIs. It encourages a very analytical and data-driven approach in addition to the creativity. So you're looking at how KPIs like revenue per user, revenue per paying user, how different spend buckets, and we'll get into some of these terms a bit later as well, how these things evolve over time. It also looks at how you can generate revenue with live operations and how you can actually sustain your business going forwards. You want to create updates, but you need to ensure that you're still getting revenue for them. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pay your developers and your team. So in terms of how and when you start doing this, we'll start with the when. The easy answer to this is now or yesterday or as soon as possible. If you're going to design an IAP monetization strategy, it should be done ideally with the design of the game from an early point where you're saying, okay, here is how I'm going to design my game. Here are the game pillars. Here are the main systems. Here is how the loop works. And here is how monetization can fit into that loop. If you're not doing this, it's okay. You can still add monetization layers to an already rounded out product. It just means that it might not gel as well. Like the pieces might not fit together in the perfect way. And this is primarily because monetization design, it affects every aspect of game design, economy design, your release plan, your product backlog, like your marketing strategy. It affects so many different things that it's really important to get it on the radar as soon as possible and start working towards it. I would say, like I mentioned, you can add it at a later point. I think the biggest challenge that I've seen when people try and add free-to-play systems to a non-free-to-play game at a later point is usually when there is a low commitment to doing it. Everybody on the team has to be invested in actually taking this on. Otherwise, the implementation won't be as satisfying. Players will notice, and it won't feel like a good experience for you or the players. But there are notable examples of pivoting from a premium model to IAPs and a free-to-play model that have worked really well. A good example here would be Fall Guys. Obviously, that came out during pandemic, and it was a crazy time, and people were looking for new spaces where they could socialize, where they could compete and have fun, and they moved from a premium model to free-to-play, IAP-driven, and as a result, the game became a runaway success, and later spawned Stumble Guys from Scopely and so on. So there is precedent for it. It is possible to do it, but the sooner you think about it, the easier it is. The next step is really, I would say, look at competitors next, but I don't want to dwell too much on that. And the main reason is that it's useful to know what your competitors are doing. So if you see there are comparable games on the market, it's useful to see what they're up to, how they're monetizing, what their approach is, because you can definitely learn from it. But every game is different. Like, there are no two games that are absolutely identical. Not really. So understand what makes your game different, but also then understand what makes your audience different. So even if the games are very similar, the audience can be a very different group of people. And that's why the next step for me is really defining your audience motivation. What makes the players of your game want to stick around? What gets them excited about continuing to play the game, logging in every day? And I've just listed out some examples here of motivations for solo players as well as for kind of more multiplayer. And these are, what are the investments, or sorry, what are the motivations for your audiences to start thinking about spending? Obviously, there are motivations for them playing, but here we're looking more at what's going to make them actually spend on an IAP. So in a solo play, you've got examples like investment in the core mechanics. That is to say, if you're playing Candy Crush and you want to add 5 moves because you failed a level, that's investing in the core mechanics. Personal progress or power, that's going to be more maybe in an RPG style game where you want to upgrade quicker. Specific rewards or unlocks, maybe they're time limited. VIP program benefits, some quality of life stuff. Rewarding the developers. It's not so common that people invest just because they like the developers of a game and they go, I'm going to give them something back, but it can occasionally happen. Losing something they had, so that's like the loss aversion idea. And then time pressure is another good one. And then you can think about, well, where are they going to spend typically in games? Is it going to be in gacha, like loot box systems? Is it going to be more on timers or energy, the ability to carry on playing? Maybe they're going to spend in currency sales. Maybe they're going to spend in direct sales if you want to sell them an item specific to them. Maybe it's just general resources that represents an interesting thing for them to purchase. So these are all kind of examples of spend motivations if you're looking at more solo-oriented experiences. But then you've also got the other part of it, which for me is particularly powerful and particularly interesting, is the kind of multiplayer side of things where people actually spend because of reasons like social pressure. So the fact that other people have done something maybe to contribute to the club and you want to then do the same, or you feel compelled to do the same. Also a sense of belonging, a feeling like, well, if I purchase something and other people maybe get a reward as well, then that's going to make me feel good because they're going to welcome me more into the group. And then again, specific rewards or unlocks, maybe that's again tied to like a time or a mission framework where you're achieving things together. So people often spend with contributions to like a group cause and also common objectives in this case. So these are some ideas that I hope you can also take and start thinking about your audience motivations to spend and how they might be looking at it. But we'll go a bit deeper. And I'll just show you some examples of some of the more interesting ones that I think. So VIP programs is something that exists in, I would say, kind of more mid-core games you're looking at for this. This was from a game that I worked on called Dragon Soul some years ago. And the basic idea is the more you spend, the more you get back. So if I spend some money, I'm going to not only get the things that I bought, but I'm going to get some extra benefits on top of that, which will persist. Quite often you would achieve a VIP level and like it would stay there throughout your game lifetime. So it was a constant progression system for spending. And we used this to great effect in Dragon Soul. There were quality of life improvements, there were some exclusive items, and it really helped to support the kind of longer retention of spenders. Then another concept of spend motivation here as loss aversion. So Fallout Shelter, kind of, I would say, between casual and mid-core kind of building and exploring game. It uses the principle of like losing items that you've collected. So you send your explorers out into the wasteland, they collect a bunch of cool loot, but you need to keep an eye on their health and their progress. Otherwise, they might die out there, and if they do, then you have to spend a lot of money to bring them back. And this similar principle of loss aversion is something that we see also in streaks, in like win streaks, but in login streaks too. For example, in platforms like Duolingo, where people are so obsessed with their streak that it just becomes a kind of reason to log in every day. And I don't recall in Duolingo if you can pay to recover your streak if you miss a day, but I would be surprised if they don't have it, because the amount of people that would pay purely for that, I think, is significant. Then here's one of the kind of more multiplayer-oriented motivations in practical terms in another game that I worked on a long time ago called Knights and Dragons. And this was about wanting to feel like belonging and appreciation from people in your guild. And this was about if you were to purchase, you could unlock some additional rewards for your guild. And this became a very strong motivator, because if I purchase and somebody gets something, that person is more likely to then purchase as well in order to pass that benefit on and hopefully give me something back in the process. So community and guilds and that kind of thing are very, very strong motivators towards monetization. And then just lastly, on the motivation side of things, some of the motivations can be as simple as I want to be the best. I want to reach the top of the leaderboard. And that's kind of the case in Clash Royale here. It's all about trying to be the best, reach the highest level or the highest rank in Clan Wars. And then they break it into seasons so that you can always spend and then get ready for the next season again. And as with football, there's always like a next time to win. There's always a next game, a next season in this case. The final thing to say on the motivation side is just you can run your ideas through a system called the Tower of Want. It's something that I've used before, and it can be quite useful just to think about, again, your audience motivations, about like what it is they want to achieve. So this looks at game motivations, and then you can think about how you transform those into how do I sell IAPs, how do I monetize. So at the top of the Tower of Want, you have something like, I want to defeat raid bosses and climb the leaderboards. So I need to progress in the game and unlock raid bosses. So I need to complete planets by defeating their bosses. So I need, and basically you just take this kind of statement to its logical conclusion by starting at your biggest goal and then looking at all the sub goals you need in order to achieve that biggest goal. And by doing this, you can then look at, okay, well, what are the opportunities for monetization within this? Like in this case, I need to progress in the game, unlock raid bosses. Well, maybe raid bosses have a ticket system. I need to upgrade my gear and character. Well, maybe that means I need to purchase more gacha, like more loot boxes in order to do that. So this is another way that you can approach thinking about how to look at audience motivation for the gameplay and then add monetization on top of it. We're going to get technical for a little while and look at some kind of pricing and selling stuff. Like I said, I think in terms of defining like your own monetization strategy with IAPs, like the main bits of advice I can give you, like we've just been through, are look at competitors, don't take exactly what they're doing, but try and understand, and then look at your audience's motivations and try and build monetization logically into those. Once you've done that, we start moving into, okay, well, where do I start with actually pricing? Like, how do I think about this? Because I don't know how much anything is worth in my economy. So hopefully this will help a little bit. So firstly, we're going to look at item, price, and demand. So you're all familiar, I'm sure, with the idea of like a price and demand curve where, let's say, if there's one thing in the world, like if there is one ultra rare watch, it's only one that's ever been created, that is going to be worth a lot more than one that of which there are 50 million, logically. So the quantity has a direct effect on the price. In this graph in the upper right, we can see the different kind of price points based on the quantity sold. So we can see that at point 0, we basically have a price of 12, but none of them sold. At point 2 on the x-axis, we see that we've sold 8. That's good. We've made 16 currency in this case. We can also see that at 4, we've sold 4. So we've also made 16 currency. And then at price 0, well, we've sold 6. And basically, it's this is just to illustrate how like how the quantity really affects pricing. The actual optimal price here is actually none of these. It's actually at point 3, because at point 3 you will get you'll get 6 value, and that makes 18 as your output, as your revenue. But the idea of this is pretty much that you have to experiment. You have to start somewhere, and you have to try and understand how much your items are worth. So, how do you go about doing this? Well, you experiment within that graph to try and obtain optimal pricing. And your key considerations when you're experimenting are the real euro cost from each hard currency price point. I'll show you more on that in a moment. Consistency against other items and promotions. So if you're building an IAP and you want to sell something for $20, that needs to be consistent with the other items that you're selling. Like that value needs to make sense. the community response, how the community perceive the value, because your community might think that something is worth a lot more or a lot less than you do. The timing of your experiments, but the timing of your pricing changes also makes an impact here. And also, again, the pricing of your competitors. The +5 moves example in Candy Crush, if that costs the equivalent of €1, you can't really do the same thing for €5. And then here we're looking at like different kind of price point bundles. So at the top we have gems per euro, basically, in the upper table. And then underneath we have all of the different items that I'm selling and what those prices actually translate into in real world money. So item 1 for 70 currency is worth 46 cents to someone who buys gems at the lowest price point. Again, I have to go a little bit quick through this, but I hope you'll be able to see it again later and review if you want to pause at this point. Doing this experiment just again allows you to compare your different items against one another in terms of their price for the user, and also allows you to compare an item's price across the different price points. Because typically, if somebody spends €100 on hard currency, they will get better value than someone who spends €2. So this is just a summary of those points. I don't think I need to dwell on it, but again, you can look back at it later. In terms of selling, there are lots of different mechanisms that you can use to sell different things. So gems, hard currency, loot boxes, VIP scheme, login rewards, battle passes, events, like these are all selling opportunities. And then you, along with these opportunities, you have a bunch of modifiers that you can use. So whether that's the price, which is usually a big factor here, you've also got then like the actual quantity of the item, the duration of the promotion, maybe the weight of the item within a loot box, so the probability, all of these different kinds of considerations. And the most important thing typically to try and sell in an IAP driven game is the first time buyer package. This is because the first time buyer package represents the best value for money. It's always the one that's priced at around $2 to $5 and always contains extreme kind of discount or additional value on top. Psychologically speaking, the first spend in an IAP driven game is the hardest one for players to achieve. So this is the one that we need to focus on most in order for people to spend once and then go, actually, I feel good about that. I got a nice reward. I'm happy to spend again. When we do try and encourage people to spend, we often see things like, 800% value. This is based on a number called estimated value. And all that is the standard price divided by the promotional price as a percentage. So to give you an example, this blue chest here, its standard price is 800. It's actually priced at 600, and that's 133% estimated value. The reason for doing these estimated value calculations is because it will affect all of your different promotions and sales and live ops and all of that kind of stuff. And you can see a very clear correlation often between the value you're giving away and the revenue you're generating from a promotion. So here is basically looking at revenue versus estimated value. And if the value you're giving away increases, you would assume that the revenue should also increase. This is an important relationship to maintain. If that doesn't happen, like in the case where these two are circled red, then you need to look more closely at those promotions, understand why these particular IAPs are not working well. Then we've got some general advice around value perception. For example, it's the same estimated value to say buy one get one free or 50% off, but they're actually used for different things. So 50% off would be easier for first-time buyers or for like lower spenders, whereas buy one get one free is going to be more appealing to spenders who can afford it, who spend a little bit more on a regular basis. And then we also have like item bundles. You can show like X value, you can show 25 times value or 233%. These numbers can feel a bit abstract. Sometimes it's better to just have a red line through the old value and say, okay, this is actually worth 20 euros, you can have it for 2. It's a bit more, I guess it's a bit more straightforward for purchasers at this point. Then also how you phrase things to your players makes a difference. Like how you tell them or encourage them rather to purchase makes a difference. So here's an example from Whiteout Survival, which says top up now. Like this is known as a call to action. So using purchase or top up now is more emotive than just saying buy. That's not really a very compelling thing, but top up now it adds pressure, and yeah, like I say, it's known as a call to action in this case. You can also experiment with limits. So quite often with IAPs and quite often with a first-time buyer promotion, it's limited to 1 per account. But there are other limits often in place, like timed promotions to increase urgency and the sense of fear of missing out. There's limits per account, like I just mentioned. There's also time limited per account. So you can buy 1 of something per week, maybe at a good rate. That can be quite good for longer retention and longer spending over time. You can also experiment if you really want with a limited total quantity where you say, there are only 5 of these ever. You can buy 1 and then that will be deducted from the total. That's riskier and tends to be very unpopular, so I would avoid it. And then there's some psychological selling as well. Again, this is all feeding back into trying to encourage your players towards IAPs. And one of the ways you can do this is by price anchoring. So if you can see the example at the top, it's from The Economist from some years ago, where basically they offered a web subscription for $59, a print subscription for 125, or a print and web subscription for 125. The idea is that you look at that and you say, well, obviously I'm going to go for the print and web subscription because no one would buy the print subscription. That's the same price and I get less for it. But the print and web now seems like much better value for me because it's anchored my price expectation that this is the worth of a print subscription, and print and web together, I'm getting so much more value for my money. You can do this in games as well, and it's quite common to see examples of purchases side by side where one is far more attractive than the other. And because you think that that one is far more attractive, maybe players even think, okay, somebody has made a mistake here. Either way, it creates an impulse to buy. You can also use charm pricing, which is basically about having like 99 as the price instead of a rounded number. Again, this is like basic pricing psychology, but you can see that the conversion rates, this is from an e-commerce platform, increase significantly when the price is 99 instead of rounded up. And then the rule of 3. There's a lot of point of sale devices these days where it's all about like, do you want to leave a tip? And you can leave a custom tip, or you've got the 3 options. And people always, not always, but the majority of people will typically pick the middle option. The lower option is being cheap. The higher option is a bit too pricey. I'll just go for the middle one. and I've included a link to a bunch more on kind of psychological selling if it's of interest. It's psychological selling and behavioral economics. All right, so I hope that was interesting for you. That was a bit of a kind of whistle-stop tour around the world of IAP sales. Yeah, let me know.
I'm pretty caught up by the psychological sailing. That seems to work quite well with me, I must say, especially like
You're welcome.
yeah. So definitely, I think it's a great overview about like purchase and what developers can explore. I think we on the web we're catching up with where mobile are in terms of in-app purchase. So very very cool to see this whole overview. I think now we can open up for questions. There's some questions. I drop a few, but we also have from our developers. So
Yeah. There's one from Nishad who's actually developing a multiplayer game, and he asks if he published a multiplayer free-to-play game on Steam and added microtransactions as a monetization method. Do you think it will be successful financially?
That's a big question without playing the game, but it can be for sure. So I've worked with developers on Steam who make very good money by publishing free-to-play and microtransaction-driven games. The key is really the experience. So quite often, in order to compete with the other premium games on Steam, people spend a lot of money on trying to get graphics up to a very high level, trying to make it into something impressive that stands out. In my experience, they don't spend quite enough time looking at how monetization would logically bind to the core game, to the meta game, like how you can actually engage your audience to monetize. And obviously, it's a big risk, no matter what. Like publishing your game anywhere, if it's going to make money back or not. But Steam has proven that you can make significant money from it. I mean, looking at things like Dota as an example, I know that's like a very old example and it's been around for a while, but it's a free-to-play game. It makes tons of money. It always has. It will continue to do so because of the quality of game and because they've built clever monetization into it by looking not just at cosmetics, but how they can, rely on the community to help fund a competition through the compendiums and all this kind of stuff. So it's definitely possible. Don't lose hope. But yeah, good luck.
But it's not something you would recommend to start with.
I mean, personally, I prefer to start on a platform where you can test more. So I would tend to rely more on mobile, or web for that matter, because they're portals or spaces where you can test stuff out much quicker and iterate quicker. Steam and basically any of the console storefronts is always going to be a slower process, and testing is more challenging. Like, I don't think you can really A/B test on those.
yeah, definitely. You definitely. I think Crazy Games and web as a whole is actually a great place to iterate and quick try ideas. Ideate and see the player's stickiness. Which brings, I guess, to the next question.
From Raphael. What are some of the biggest monetization mistakes that indie developers make?
The number one mistake is looking at a competitor product and saying, I'll just do what they're doing. Like I mentioned during the presentation, every game is unique and needs to be treated that way. And even if the game is similar, your audience might be different, and your audience is going to monetize in different ways. To give you an interesting example, I was working on a racing title not that long ago, and looking around at the competition and seeing what else is out there. There are studios, for example, in the Middle East who rely heavily on very specific cosmetics. And they're about cosmetics, about putting flags on the car or having a tiger sitting in the passenger seat and all this kind of stuff. And you're like, this is crazy. It's wonderful, but it's kind of crazy. And they've built something that works for their audience. They didn't look at CSR necessarily and go, oh, we'll just do what they're doing. They understood who they're appealing to and try to monetize on that basis and have been successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay, which takes us to our next question. First of all, Justin really loved the Mythic Quest reference. And his question is, how would you recommend simple but addictive gameplays like Tetris 2048 or Wordle to monetize via in-app? Basically, turning the hyper-casual mechanics to in-app heavy meta gameplays.
Yeah, so this is a challenging problem, and obviously there are games that have struggled with this for a while. I would say, firstly, you can always go the route of ads, but if you want to look at IAPs for this kind of thing, you could look at adding energy systems to just the core gameplay. I don't particularly recommend it because I think if you've got people who are engaged in your game, you want them playing it as much as possible. You don't want to limit their game time anymore. I think that idea is largely over. The second part is where I would really look to monetize would be in the kind of meta or in some kind of parallel progression. So, for example, if you have a game like, let's take Wordle, you can add crazy systems to the back of Wordle if you really wanted. You could add streak systems, you could add a VIP progression, you could add a base building meta game if you wanted, and have these tie somewhat into the core. It's difficult when the core is totally skill based. So again, a game like Wordle, you can't really offer people monetization on that unless it's like a hint system or something that basic. But most people don't even want that who play those kind of games. So I would say rather than do that, try and offer maybe like a light cosmetic or yeah, probably a light cosmetic system within the core gameplay, which is drawn from a meta game where you can actually have people investing money and time. So again, whether that's a base builder or some kind of, I don't know, character investment or whatever, um, it doesn't really matter. But I think you would have to separate out the monetization from the core and really focus on the meta progression.
Okay, thank you so much. And with that, you mentioned the cosmetic changes before for the tigers and everything. So for the different tools, based on the different regions, what would you recommend for adjusting the pricing? Basically, you mentioned three different options for three different pricing. My question is, how would you adjust it based on the regions, different countries?
So I believe that there are platforms that will help you more with this. I will say I'm not really in a position to recommend any specific platforms. I have heard good things about using platforms like Balancy for it. But like this is not from my own experience. So I think there are possibilities to optimize pricing for sure. When I was working at Rovio, we ran specific promotions with targeted pricing in different parts of South America and parts of Africa, and like adapting the pricing yielded much better results than otherwise. And these were permanent changes as well. Like this was not just an event where we dropped the price for a bit, but actually permanently changing the pricing to better reflect disposable income of different areas. This when we did it, I mean, this was in 2014, 15. It was all very manual, and we changed values for specific countries. I'm sure that there are better tools out there by now, but yeah.
Okay, and thank you so much for that. And what upcoming trends do you see on IAP monetization for the web gaming games?
I mean, firstly, I think it's just going to become deeper, right? Like web is increasingly being seen as a kind of and it's not a new frontier, but like an expanding frontier and an area for growth. And I think realistically, we're looking at like IAP systems that are going to just be deeper because the gameplay experiences are going to be deeper. So I really like working with mid-core games, for example, because they have complex and layered economies, different systems of investment, different possibilities for players to spend money and to get interesting rewards back. And realistically, that for me is the way that web will go as well.
Yeah. Also, just to add to that, I also feel like, do you think like this impact directly also in the retention of the web games, which have are different than the mobile? But do you see a trend, and or at least that potential impact?
Sorry, I missed that last part. Can you say again?
If you see the impact, if you see that games that have in-app purchase, if you're gonna have an impact on retention because people are more invested into the game, for instance.
For sure. I mean, retention on games where you have ads can be quite a divisive thing sometimes. If the ads are too in your face too often, it can push you out. If you have something that pushes in-app purchases where, you're encouraged to spend over time, you do spend and then you feel rewarded by it, then your retention does always increase. Like it keeps you around for longer. So there's definitely a correlation between in-app purchase usage and retention. The biggest thing is just to make sure that players constantly feel like they're getting their money's worth, like they're getting something positive from the experience, and it's not a purchase they make and then go, "Oh, I wish I hadn't done that," which obviously then leads to a negative retention experience.
All right. How?
Yeah.
Yeah, and I
I
think
th-
this is the one we see a lot now. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts on that one.
I think it is similar to Justin's question, how to effectively transition from ad heavy model to stronger IAP for maintaining a good engagement rate.
Yeah. So it's the $1 million question right now. Um, I mean, generally, like I say, it's about not compromising the hyper casual or casual core experience whilst also building meta systems on the back of it that can feed into it somewhat. Um, the best example of this by a long way, that I've seen at least, is Last War, um, where basically you have this kind of very hyper casual gameplay of troops walking down a road, going through different barriers of multipliers and whatever. But then also, um, like on the back of that, you have a base builder. On the back of that, you also have like a hero and team builder where you can invest in different characters and stuff. So it's actually a very deep kind of mid-core role-playing game, but on the face of it, it's very kind of open and casual and welcoming to everybody. And they do, I think, a very good job of transitioning players from the very casual gameplay into suddenly I'm base building and now investing in troops and so on.
All right, that's well, let's take note on that one, Rovio. I think that's we got the answers to the $1 million question.
Yes. And one other thing to add to that is that in general, what we recommend is testing the mechanics and then adding maybe skip its or multiplayer aspects, like investing more after testing the first mechanics. But I think nowadays everyone knows what works in terms of the basic mechanics. It is just where we invest that takes the time. So, what are the upcoming trends do you see in net monetization for web games nowadays?
That's a tough one. I
Or
guess.
maybe not web as a whole. We can talk about in-app purchase in the realm of in-app purchase.
Well, I mean, I think though there has been a gap between web and mobile for a long time. Obviously, like web is now getting much closer to mobile, and I think realistically they will work in parallel going forwards. So in general, I do see a kind of bigger trend towards more like multiplayer oriented monetization. it's something where it's happened competitively for a long time in, like a Call of Duty mobile or something, where you buy cosmetics to show off to your friends, but also so, when you kill people, they see you running around looking cool and all this. But there's much more to it than that. Like, you can have like shared experiences, and like I was saying, this kind of, you create these feelings of belonging, of reciprocity, of wanting to give back to a group that you're a part of who's given you something. And I think that's really going to be an area that's going to carry on growing. There's still one thing that I'm waiting to see more of, which is like shared purchasing. So there are shop platforms where if there are like 5 people buying a thing, it's cheaper than if one person is buying it. I can imagine that's going to come to mobile games and web games at some point, where actually the more people who buy it as a group, the price goes down.
Like Groupon, remember Groupon? That was a thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. I like the word. That's smart. Okay, right. With that, I would like to wrap up. I would like to thank Nick as well for the time and to be here and share his knowledge. Thank you so much. You feel free to let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so I mean, I have my website, which is gamesconsulting.net. Also, you can just find me on LinkedIn. It's probably the easiest place. You can write to me there.
All right, wonderful. With that, I would like to thank everybody, not just to be here today, but also to be part of the Crazy Game, our game jam, and also the incubation. I know it's been a very, I would say challenging 3 months with a lot happening. But we're very excited. We already saw some preview about the projects. I think there's some great stuff coming. We can't wait to play your final submission. Please make sure you don't miss the deadlines, right? Your account manager should be able to provide any support you need. In case you need, do let us know if you need anything this next couple of weeks. We, as the Crazy Games team, so that you know, we'll be meeting in March in Belgium, and we'll be playing all the company will be playing your games. So you will see the results once we have that. So once again, thank you so much. Have a good one, everyone. Thank you.
Have a good one. Take care. Bye-bye.
Welcome to the post-event celebration of Crazy Web Game Jam 2024. Our very first jam has been an incredible journey, and it's all thanks to you. This year's theme, Everything is a Remix, inspired the participants to blend genres, mechanics, and ideas from all over. The results were nothing short of spectacular. Out of hundreds of incredible submissions, these outstanding games were chosen for our incubation program. These teams have shown exceptional creativity, innovation, and dedication. The Crazy Web Game Jam brought together over 2,000 developers from across the world, from seasoned veterans to first-time jammers. Every participant showcased the incredible power of creativity. We had 317 games submitted, a community brought together. We want to extend our deepest gratitude to our sponsors and partners, including Indie Hero, Crazy Games, Unity, and Photon for making this jam possible. We also want to thank all the mentors and judges who helped us during the jam. But above all, we want to thank you, the jammers. Without your incredible talent and hard work, this jam would not have been possible. The Crazy Web Game Jam 2024 was just the beginning. Stay tuned for more exciting events in the future. Until then, keep creating, keep innovating, and see you next time.